Hey, cool kids, welcome back to the Beat Motel Podcast. It's Andrew here. Dr. Sam Page is in Helsinki enduring very hot weather, which isn't something you'd think about around Helsinki. We've got a special episode today. This is the first of one of God knows how many episodes where we're going to look at a piece of musical history, something that we think's unique and really interesting. And for this dive into a particular slice of history, I have a good friend of mine with me. Good friend, would you like to introduce yourself?
I am Andrew's good friend. My name's Simon Finbow, and we are bandmates in These Are End Times.
Nicely introduced. So, give you a bit of backstory on what we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about
Pink Floyd Live in Pompeii.
That's it. And the reason we're going to talk about it isn't very deep. I was flicking through YouTube, and somebody started a Pink Floyd in 4K channel. And when I saw some of the footage, first of all, I was just blown away because it literally looks like it was filmed last week. The quality is incredible. But then I saw Echoes, the first part of Echoes. And Pink Floyd don't need an introduction, I don't think. But they loom so large in the mind of probably most humans on Earth. But never really meant that much to me. Never really clicked with me. I listened to Dark Side of the Moon on your recommendation, Simon, after you recommended a pair of headphones to listen to them.
Oh, yes.
On.
Yes.
And I liked that a great deal, but I sort of not really dived into it all that much. But this Live in Pompeii, seeing Echoes, I was quite taken aback. So I thought, let's do a podcast episode around Echoes.
And why not?
Okay, so we're going to start with a bit of music, and Simon has given me I think 10 clips that we're going to work with, and I'm going to play the first one. I'm going to remind you what the title is, though, Simon. Don't worry, I'm not just going to throw them at you. And the title you gave me is One of These Days Doctor Who Bit. Is that all right as the first clip?
If you want to, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah, why
so
not?
One of These Days Doctor Who Bit. So, why Doctor Who?
Clearly, heavily influenced by the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, I think, and particularly the Doctor Who theme. To me, that just reeks of...
Really?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And in later incarnations of Pink Floyd, they actually did the kind of wow, 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 over the top in a kind of homage. So yeah, I think I generally think that's kind of... They borrowed bits and pieces from lots of different places. And I think that's probably a direct lift from the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
See, when you gave me that clip, all of these are ripped from YouTube, and listeners, if you've not listened before, for licensing reasons, we can't use more than 30 seconds of anything. So these are ripped from YouTube, and when you said it was the Doctor Who bit, I genuinely looked at the footage, and I looked at the sand and the amphitheatre, and I looked at the whole setup, and I thought, well, I suppose it does look like something from Doctor Who, because the camera's sort of lifting up very, very slowly over the mixing desk.
Much higher production values than any Doctor Who episode, I think.
Yeah. Obviously, so right, let's go back to the beginning then.
Okay.
That was our intro clip.
Yeah.
So, what is Live in Pompeii? Is it live in Pompeii or at Pompeii?
It's at Pompeii, isn't it? I think it's the whole thing was almost a kind of happy accident from what I understand. Andrew kind of Maben, who was the director, was from Cambridge originally, but living in France, was a big fan of Pink Floyd, particularly their kind of space rock. And at the time, Pink Floyd were dabbling in lots of kind of European art house stuff. They were doing soundtracks for ballets. They just soundtracked a film called More, which is a French kind of art film. So they were a bit lost. They'd lost their main band member, songwriter. And none of them knew how to write songs, so they were just in this kind of limbo of, right, well, let's just do long, interesting songs. They weren't particularly great musicians, apart from Dave Gilmour, who was clearly a kind of very gifted guitarist. The rest of them were just sort of muddling along, and that's accidentally they kind of stumbled upon this kind of formula of kind of space rock.
It's interesting because we look back on. I grew up in the same as you, late 70s, early 80s. Well, I'm still growing up now.
Yeah, we all are, yeah.
And Pink Floyd were huge, like biggest band in the world.
Yeah.
So it's hard to imagine that back in the early 70s, they weren't.
No, they're very much a kind of underground band, just a heads band. They were if you went to any head's house, they'd hand you a joint, said smoke that and listen to this, you know, and that was most people's introduction to Pink Floyd. You know,
just to be clear, Simon doesn't remember that. He's not old enough to have actually.
No, that's true.
Oh, but I remember back.
That's true. Back in the day, you know, back at Woodstock. No, but I think they were very much a kind of. People dismiss them offhand. You know, I think they're the most influential band, other than the Beatles, that there's ever been. And when I say influential, I mean their cast is so wide. There's a big difference between seminal, which is bands like AAM, you know, and Velvet Underground, who at the time 3 or 4 people bought their records and were listening to them. Pink Floyd had this kind of, they married the kind of weird with the lyrical and the beautiful, and sort of sold it as this sort of experimental kind of sandwich, you know, that people could digest easily. And I think if you look at all the bands over the years that have been influenced by them, many, like even people like Nine Inch Nails, Smashing Pumpkins, all cite them as a kind of major influence.
You can hear it a lot when you listen back, and one of the things I really like about the ability we have to discover more music now than ever before is you can hear a song and think, wow, that's really original, and then some bastard tells you, no, actually it's just somebody ripping off this.
That's right, yeah, absolutely.
And we have got a bit of that later coming on,
yeah.
So if you like that kind of thing, stick around. So basically a director approached Dave Gilmour and said, let's make a film. Where did the money come from if they weren't a successful band?
Was it, I can't remember, was it Arts Council funded? Was it funded by, I really don't know actually, Andrew. Where did the money come from, do you know?
Oh, I don't know.
No? I don't know. I assume they'd maybe the record company had put something forward, possibly.
They're on EMI, weren't they?
They were on EMI, that's right. So at that time, I think EMI didn't really know what to do with them at that point. They were selling enough records to be steady. You know, they were just about to release, after this came out, they were just about to release Medal, which was their sort of gateway, which Echoes which we'll talk about later, is a key part. But the story is that the director wanted to do something with them. There were several meetings that took place, all of which people said, yeah, we'll do it, and things fell by the wayside. And Andrew Maben was on holiday in Italy, and got to the airport, and there was a mishap with his passport, couldn't find his passport, or something had gone, but there was something wrong with his passport, so he had to hang around. So he decided to go to Pompeii, or the amphitheatre in Pompeii in the evening one night, and just had this kind of this moment as, oh my God, this would be perfect. And I think his idea was that concert films up until then, Woodstock, you know, the Rolling Stones movies, they'd all very much been about the kind of interaction between the band and the audience. And Pink Floyd had always been a kind of shrouded in mystery. No one really knew when they performed. You couldn't really see them. You know, they were performed behind these kind of inkjet kind of light shows, etc. So they were completely faceless, really. So that seemed the perfect way to present them. You know, and they had this futuristic, at the time, what they called space rock. You know, which I'm sure that is a term they hated. But many people didn't know how they got. They were cutting edge. People didn't know how they got their sound, you know, and it was a perfect way to marry the kind of ancient with the kind of new, you know, almost in a kind of Sun Ra orchestra way, I guess. Do you know what I mean? It seemed like the perfect thing.
One of the things that really surprised me about watching Echoes, I think in particular, is that it's so rudimentary. They had, I think, an 8-track.
That's right, they did.
And I think you and I, probably have recorded 8 tracks at some point in our lives because we're not that young. But to get that kind of sound from an 8-track is phenomenal. So they don't have banks of processing equipment.
Nope.
You know, describe the scene in the amphitheatre.
Well, it's a completely empty amphitheatre. Sand in the middle, you know, typical Roman amphitheatre, which you can imagine. And the film starts with just this great pan in. It's an overhead shot. The band are right in the middle of the amphitheatre. You've just got a bank of amps, you know. You can't even see the film crew at that point, which must be hovering around. But it's this really, really, as they're starting Echoes, this really slow pan in, almost imperceptible, you know. And then before you know it, you're kind of centered on the drum kit and Echoes are kind of kicking off. But it's completely desolate, isn't it? You know, there's nothing around.
There's
you know?
so few crew there as well.
That's right.
Because I think it's their touring rig they took.
That's right.
So it's not like they built a stage. Well, there is no stage.
There's no stage. No, that's
there
right.
isn't a stage. We're used to seeing bands on stage with amps behind. What's called Euro truss, the trussing that goes up and over the band, something behind them. Even Woodstock, like the Woodstock film, which is pretty rudimentary, the sound systems, they still had stages.
Yeah.
Whereas kind of there's one point in the film where Dave Gilmour's, he's just sat in the sand.
Yeah.
And he's got like pedals and stuff.
Yeah.
Not many pedals.
No.
Again, like he's got, I'm not going to be too much of a geek, but it's
a wah-wah, I think. And
no, it's a very flex, I think
Yeah.
it's called, or something like that.
yeah.
That's it. There is no... The mixing desk, which is actually tiny compared to what you'd even see in a pub gig now, I think there's like 2 or 3 kind of sound techs there.
Yeah. And they are there at Pink Floyd's insistence. They were just
Oh,
going to...
really?
Yeah. They insisted on it being recorded through an 8-track. I think they were just going to record it with a few mics. Do you know what I mean? Live sound, and maybe overdub it afterwards. And Pink Floyd, no, we want to do it live. Absolutely. And I think it is completely live, but I think it's... I mean, the editing must be extraordinary, because some of those tracks are done in parts, apparently. These different takes. Yeah,
I was really surprised
But I had no idea, because it flows beautifully, and with the kind of rudimentary editing technology they had, and you couldn't digitally alter sound or anything at the time. So to piece that together the way they have is quite extraordinary, actually.
The editing of the whole thing is interesting. I think not just from a sound perspective, but also from the perspective of how it looks. Because one of the things that surprised me reading up on it, and listeners, I only read up a little bit because I wanted to learn. Part of the joy of these kind of episodes is learning about things. But one bit that surprised me, if you look at the Wikipedia page for this film, it talks about the director taking the film home to edit it at home, and then there's a little note saying which he didn't want to do because he was trying to maintain a work-life balance.
That's
like,
yeah.
what an odd thing.
Yeah,
but
no.
we think now of editing. Where I'm sat now, I edit footage, and it's all a computer. But you think, no, you could edit. It was 35 mil it was shot on, wasn't it?
Yeah, it would have been like a tape machine, wouldn't it? Effectively,
More basic than that.
Right,
Editing could be as simple as 2 reels with no motors or anything, and you're pulling the film through with just a little projector. It could just be projecting onto a wall like a few feet wide, and then when you don't like a bit, you get a razor out and you cut it and you stick it back together. So I just love the idea that it was some bloke at home.
Yeah.
Like Saturday afternoon while his kids are playing on the lawn, sort of editing a fucking film.
Yeah.
It's absolutely wild.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the thing is, I'd not seen it for years. I hadn't watched it for 20 years.
Did you watch the 4K?
Oh, yeah. I've seen it twice, actually.
Right.
Yeah, once because I wanted to do a bit of research for this and kind of refresh my memory, and also just this morning, just for sheer enjoyment. I loved it so much. And it wasn't until I'd read a little bit about it that I had no idea that most of it was actually shot in Paris and not shot in Pompeii at all. And that's completely obvious now, because you can see the back projection and you can see them all, in half of it, Rick Wright's got a beard and the other half he hasn't, which should have been some sort of a giveaway, I guess.
There's loads of continuity.
There is.
Throughout.
And they're wearing shirts in some, they're not wearing shirts in others. But cleverly, the Paris shots appear to be shot as if they're at night. There's some little bit of lighting behind them, so it could be that half of it was shot in Pompeii during the day and the other half was shot in Pompeii at night.
I assumed that's what it was
me too.
Until I first saw it, but I couldn't figure out why, for something filmed in October 1971, how they were getting such a good chroma effect, such like chroma has been about for green screen stuff. It's been about for years and years and years, but it took really until the 2000s for it to be completely neutral. For you not to be able to tell. So I was like, how are they getting this perfect black backdrop on them when they're basically in a dusty amphitheatre? I was just thinking, even just ambient dust gusts of wind, and you almost bales of dry vegetation rolling by. How have they done that? And then found out it's something called
Transflex, is it?
Transflex,
and it's a back projection, isn't it? It's and they were really, really unhappy with it at the time, But I think
the Paris footage.
With particularly the Transflex stuff, but it was too late to do anything else, so they thought, we'll just go with it. But I think it really adds to the charm of the thing itself. It's
part of the charm for me is that in 1971, cool in bands. Being cool in bands was very much a thing. You had Led Zeppelin stuffing armadillos down their trousers,
Yes.
and, you know, being like the big rock gods. You know, Robert Plant just, you know, bare-chested and barely wearing a thread, and even like Ozzy Osbourne, they had a days of the whole yacht rock thing. You know, bands like the Eagles were starting to be pristine and polished. And you mentioned a minute ago that half the band have got their tops off for some of the film, and it's not like they're buff.
No.
it's like the least kind of glamorous looking blokes with their tops off. They look exactly what you'd expect a bunch of art house musicians.
Yes, they do.
Who have never lifted anything heavier than a guitar.
Yes, absolutely.
To look, but I like that because it's for any accusations that later Pink Floyd might have levelled at them about being pretentious. I don't think Live at Pompeii actually is pretentious.
No, not at all. I don't think so. And if it is, it's certainly no fault of Pink Floyd. You know, I think any kind of pretensions that are on it would have been from the director. But I totally get the director's vision. You know, there isn't any pretense. I think he's thought, let's put the future with the past. You know, and intertwine those two things. And I think they went to the Naples Archaeological Museum and filmed a load of the mosaics there.
Well,
I think
the version I've seen,
yeah.
The one on this 4K channel, which we will link to in the show notes, that version. But I know there are other versions that have like bits from this Apollo space program in it.
Oh yes, yeah, possibly, yeah. I think there was a later one. I've not seen that.
I think it's like 2004 or something.
Pink Floyd soundtracked the Apollo space landings for BBC One. I don't know if you know that.
What?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know that.
They played live alongside the
nuts.
Apollo space landings for the BBC.
I think in end times we tried to do some soundtracking stuff, and we all just stopped playing, and we were just watching the film on the wall. We were like, okay, that's not going to work for us.
Yeah. What is extraordinary is that the BBC clearly thought the space landings weren't amazing enough that they somehow they needed a soundtrack. You know. But yeah, whether it was live or whether it was after, but they certainly did some soundtrack stuff for the around the Apollo space moon landings anyway. But yeah, you're right. It's I think there's about 4 different versions. I think Andrew Mabin's currently working on another version to bring out, presumably. I mean, what is extraordinary?
It's his pension, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is, what's kind of, I don't think the band are that bothered about it, if I'm being honest with you. The same as they hate the wall, you know, any kind of thing that they've not had 100% artistic control over, they tend to kind of dismiss.
Is that why? I just assumed Pink Floyd were like that about some things because they didn't want to be wholly defined by a thing, by like one point in their career, because they're pretty varied. Saucerful of, I can't say it. It's got too many S's in it and I haven't got enough teeth.
yeah.
From that to I just assumed that they wouldn't like the older stuff. No, like Wire, or like Wire. If you go see Wire never play anything. So it's not that.
I don't think so. I think they see. This is my. None of my favourite albums are from this period of Pink Floyd, but this is my favourite Pink Floyd period, if that makes sense. Things like Echoes, Careful with the Axe Eugene. You know, Careful with the Axe Eugene is post-rock. You know, before post-rock was a thing. You know, it's post-rock, pre-rock, pre-post-rock. You know, and it's. I think as they were embarrassed about this really because they just saw it as them 4 men floundering around, not really knowing how to write songs, you know, and just trying to make a living doing the best they can.
I want to kind of focus on that because one of the precepts that we have at the Beat Motel podcast is that we never want to assume the listener has all of the backstory.
Yeah.
So for the relevance of some of the things we're talking about, like them floundering a bit and not really knowing what it is, I can see that if I was listening to another podcast about another band, I wouldn't know why that is. Yeah. So let's just step back a bit.
Okay.
So there is a missing member.
Of course, yes.
So tell us what happened.
Well, so effectively, Pink Floyd formed as this band Sigma 9. There was 4 of them, and they're all architecture students. And they then bumped into a guy called Sid Barrett, who was a year younger than them. Was a local guy, a beautiful looking guy who wandered around Cambridge, and he joined the band. and then renamed them the Pink Floyd sounds, right? What they were originally called. But Syd Barrett was a kind of genius, maverick kind of songwriter, you know, despite the fact he hadn't been writing songs for very long, very young. He was an art student as opposed to an architecture student.
How old was he? So.
When they first, my word, 18, 19?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very young. And then they played a few gigs around Cambridge, but they quickly became this kind of space, this sort of British answer to kind of psychedelia. You know, they kind of, everything he was writing was very kind of British in counterpoint to the kind of American psychedelic movement. And they quickly became the in-house band for this club called the UFO Club in London, which was a kind of a club where people used to go and take acid, and they used to have these 24-hour kind of freakouts, you know, in what they called in this underground place called the UFO Club. So they became the in-house band for that very quickly. Syd Barrett was seen as a kind of a bit of a god to these kind of people, and was hanging out with the wrong crowd, and effectively was living in squats, and they were giving him acid and his tea all the time. And there's two
without him knowing.
Yeah, without him knowing. And there's loads of different stories. There's stories from people who worked with him after that, who kind of said that really he just didn't want to be a pop star, you know, and he wanted to step back from all that. Pink Floyd saw that very differently. They saw a person who wasn't, after having so much acid, just wasn't operating as a normal human being. So they would go to gigs and he would just stand at the front, not even playing. Yeah, he was the front man, and occasionally he'd just play a little bit and sing a bit, and occasionally he wouldn't, and just stared forward.
See, I never figured that he was the front man, because again, I'm really viewing Pink Floyd through the lens of having grown up in the 80s and 90s, and seeing this band, where even as a kid thinking, well, sometimes this guy's the lead person, sometimes this guy's the lead person, and then for reasons we'll go into later, in Live at Pompeii, there's whole massive chunks just looking at the drummer.
Yes,
I never really twigged that Syd Barrett was the leader.
So he did everything. He wrote all the songs. You know, on their first album, Pipe at the Gates of Dawn, there's only one song written by Roger Waters, who would then become sort of the driving force of Pink Floyd from Dark Side onwards. You know, everything was very much his kind of concepts. But they were, without Syd, I mean, effectively what happened was, they drafted in Dave Gilmour to cover for Syd. They wanted Syd to be a kind of a sort of stay-at-home songwriter, because he just didn't want to play live, like Brian Wilson. You know, and that was the idea. So they drafted Dave Gilmour, and he was in a band called Joker's Wild in Cambridge, who were having moderate success, nothing like the success Pink Floyd were having. So by this point, Pink Floyd had already had a couple of hits: See 'Em Really Play, Arnold Lane, and then there was a bit of a tour after Pipe Gets a Dawn around the UK, and Syd just wasn't functioning. So they quickly drafted in Dave Gilmour to cover for Syd, just to come on. And for a while, they were a five-piece.
Or like a session musician.
Yeah, effectively, yeah. He was Syd's stand-in. So if Syd didn't sing, he would step in and sing. You know, if Syd didn't play, he'd play. And they did about 3 or 4 gigs like that. And the story is, apparently they were going to some gig in Northampton or something, and they said, should we bother picking up Syd? And they went, nah, let's not bother.
Oh, really?
And off they went, and that was it. They didn't really ever see him again until, very famously, later on during Wish You Were Here, which we'll cover in another podcast one day maybe. That's quite a story. But yes, so they
turns up in the studio.
He does.
I
Yes.
won't dwell on it now.
That's right. Yeah, he absolutely does.
Different era.
While they're writing a song about him, but they were, you know, Syd was their main creator. He did everything, right? So there was a few singles that followed after Syd left, like Point Me at the Sky, and they were just kind of, they sounded like their own cover band. You know, all the charm and the genius that had been in those early kind of records had gone, and they were just, so they just thought, well, we can't really do that. We can't write songs. What can we do? So there was a track on, you know, there's Interstellar Overdrive, which they were famous for, which is a big wig out from the first album. Saucer Full of Secrets from the second album, which is just a kind of, you know, really experimental kind of instrumental track. And none of them felt comfortable being frontmen. So that was what they did. That kind of lent to the movie soundtracks and soundtracking the ballets, and then eventually to Pompeii.
So it's really interesting because it's not a band at their height making some statement. It's not. It's not. I'm trying to think of a good thing. Radiohead did a famous gig in Mojave Desert or somewhere. You know, bands that have done this, or like Queen at Wembley Stadium. You know, it wasn't like, hey, we've arrived. This is us in our pomp. It was a bunch of essentially art students,
absolutely, or architecture students. Yeah,
noodling away in an amphitheatre.
Yeah. And also, what they were famous for is their light show. And this is them filmed live.
There's not a lot of lights.
There's no lights. Yeah, there's a few spotlights, isn't there? You know, in the Paris footage, that is it. There's no lights.
Well, now I wonder, having learned a bit about the setup of it, whether I'd like to know whether they intended there to be lights or not, because there was a problem with electricity when they got to Pompeii.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, they'd made a few preliminary inquiries about the site and were reliably informed that all the power was there and was actually working.
Roman's not known for
no, they did many things. Some of their roads are still standing, but their electrical equipment, they hadn't quite made that yet. But they, famously turned up on site with all their gear, went to plug in, none of the power worked. So they were there. They only had 6 days to film this thing, and the first 2 days were spent trying to run power from the nearby village via a very long extension lead from the mayor's office, I believe, to the site, so they could actually begin. And that's originally that's why there's now only 3 songs that were recorded there out of the original. What were meant to be 7.
It was meant to be more.
Yeah, there were meant to be more. But obviously they lost 2 days filming because there was no power. Presumably the setup there. You know, if Pink Floyd were to play somewhere now, they'd be there 3 days before, just setting up the lights.
Well, they'd have a generator.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's so no power. So that wasn't a great start. And then they did, I believe, originally, Echoes wasn't meant to be, or One of These Days weren't meant to be on the recording at all. But the manager turned up, I think, the night before the first day's shooting, with a copy of Medal, which was to be their next album.
Mm-hmm.
I said, right, we've got to do Echoes. So Andrew remembers, well, I've not planned to do Echoes, but a deal was struck where they would do Echoes, and they'd do it in 2 parts, and also One of These Days. So they shot, I believe, they shot those 3 tracks. One of These Days, Careful That Axe Eugene, and Echoes Part 1 and 2. And then they were going to go off and shoot around Mount Vesuvius, but they got stuck behind some religious parade traffic for a day as well. So they lost a day's filming on the way to him. It was Our Lady of the Mount or some kind of Catholic parade, I think. So they lost a day's filming then. So it wasn't quite a disaster, but things didn't exactly go to plan on the shoot at all.
So by the time the film was ready to come out, they weren't all excited and hosting a big premiere in the Leicester Square and
No.
How was the film received?
Like most things Pink Floyd released at the time, pretty hot and cold. I think there were some people who absolutely loved it. And some people who just didn't understand it and didn't like it at all. I think Roger Waters described it as it's just even at the time, it's just us walking around some mountains with some cool Top of the Pops type visuals. You know, I think because some of the video effects, even though they were kind of state of the art then, look very rudimentary now.
Especially now in 4K.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
I think it's charming. Though.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love it for that. You know, and you don't want anything more than that. It's exactly how it should be. It should be a relic of its time, you know. But yeah, I think there's always been your lovers and your haters with Pink Floyd. People don't tend to go, I think they're all right. They can love them, or they. The
thing that surprised me is that I looked up what the industry reviews were, and quite sort of high level. Well, there's a Hollywood Reporter, I think it's called. So quite high level Hollywood titled magazines really liked it, and I think it's really surprising because you mentioned before the band films that came before. So you've got Gimme Shelter, which is obviously has the grim ending, but it's on The Crowd and other films. And then you got the absolutely batshit crazy stuff like 200 Motels by Frank Zappa, which is just like, what's happening there? So I would have expected the reception for this to be quite muted. There's not really much in it compared to 200 Motels by Frank Zappa. It's not like you can go, oh, that bit where Ringo Starr goes on about getting out some pussy. There's no sort of like.
But that's what Pink Floyd were. It was the music. They were pretty shy, with the exception of Roger Waters, who was a very kind of aggressive kind of alpha male.
Was he really?
Oh yeah. And he still is. He's a bit of a tyrant. Really. But as most kind of. I mean, most people who take the reins creatively for a group of people can become like that, and kind of and are like very dictatorial, And I think he's. I mean, it's very well documented later on how much of a, he basically said that they did nothing, from Animals on, it was all me. I did it all,
really?
That's what, and I would counter that with, listen to your solo stuff, mate. I think we can all see how much the rest of the band did, because without Gilmour's guitar, your ideas are nothing.
There's a quote in the which must be apocryphal, but there's a quote in the Queen biopic Bohemian Rhapsody where Freddie Mercury goes off, does his solo stuff, and he comes back, and Brian May says, "How was it?" He said, "Oh, we've got these musicians. They did everything I told them." And I think Brian May goes, "Yeah, that was the problem." Wasn't it?
Absolutely. That's it. Absolutely. But yeah, I have to say that they've never really been these kind of. It's never been about them, I mean, if you look at Dark Side, look at all their albums. They're not on the front covers of any of their albums apart from the first one, where it's a picture of them where they probably just did whatever EMI told them to do, But since they've had creative control, it's been these iconic covers, and sort of. I mean, I don't even think there's a picture of them on Wish You Were Here or Animals or anything, It's just they're very much a kind of, people didn't really know what they look like,
Let's have another clip. You mentioned before about Syd Barrett being kind of quite a maverick and kind of just being quite right. There's words in there somewhere. Being quite wild, and one of the things I'm interested in is after Syd Barrett was no longer a part of it. Obviously, they were still playing songs he wrote, I guess. Yeah. So I'm interested in whether the remaining band members were trying to mimic some of his wildness. And quite often when people try and do that, a lot gets lost in the translation. So I'm going to play a clip that you gave me, and I've got it labelled as Eugene Scream.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm going to play it, and then I'd like you to explain why you chose this as a clip. Before you explain, you start explaining it. The door's just opened for some reason, so I'm just going to go shut that. So why did you choose that?
Well, I picked this because it's a great moment in the film. First of all, it's kind of you've got Roger Waters over this kind of this big mic, screaming his heart out while Mount Vesuvius kind of explodes behind him. But also, it's been kind of emulated later on by people. I think. There's a musician called Blixer Bargeld who was the front person of Einstürzende Neubauten, but was also guitarist in Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds for many, many years, creative partner of Nick Cave. Right. And this it's a very similar scream that is his kind of trademark vocal kind of tick, which he does on a lot of Neubauten stuff. And he does it on a track at the end of Stagger Lee, which I think I've got a clip of as well. Which basically lifts Eugene's scream effectively. I've got a clip which I titled "Screams Nick Cave." Yes, yeah, so that's right. Let's play that.
Well, we're having fun, and then this puts a scream.
So yeah, the similarities there. You right there, Andrew?
Yeah, no. So I'm just checking, just checking it's still recording.
Okay. Yeah, the similarities there are kind of pretty stark, I think. You know, I've not heard a scream like that before, and to be honest, that's Blix's scream. You know, very very similar. But
It seemed massively out of context when I first saw it.
Yeah. But it's even listen to those two clips. It's almost the same piece of music, I think. Do you know what I mean? It's quite extraordinary. Talking of which, as I said before, about this band being massively influential, and probably this film being more influential than people realise, because there's a band called the Young Gods, and if you were to play, I think I've labelled a track.
Young God's Summer Eyes, I've got labelled here. Now I'm going to play the bit I've got labelled as Young God's bit, so Simon, just let us know if it's still on the clip. I think I might have nosed up the end.
That's fine. But I mean that is clearly a kind of direct lift. You know, it's a homage rather than a kind of than a. I think if you listen to that entire summarised track, they clearly thought we want to do echoes in our own way. I don't know if you know much.
What year was this?
Oh, Young Gods. Oh, my word! Now you're asking. 90.
It's 91.
It's 91, is it? Okay, right. 91. Yes, 91. But they are not a band that you would say, oh, they're influenced by Pink Floyd, you know, but they clearly were, and clearly probably from watching Live in Pompeii. I mean, their setup is completely different in that they had a drummer and a guy on samples and keyboards and a singer. That was it. There's no guitarist in the band. There's no, so all those sounds are made by, which now sounds pretty de rigueur and normal, but at the time was completely revolutionary. There was no, I don't think there was any other band who had a live drummer and played samples.
No, just hearing that, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So whether that bit is made up of samples of echoes, the keyboard break certainly is. It's a direct sample, but it's just an example of the influence they've had, I think, over acts that you necessarily wouldn't think they'd influenced.
No, fascinating stuff. So let's have a look. We've got loads of stuff for echoes, but let's start with Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. So let me know why you chose this clip. This is one of my sort of favourite Pink Floyd songs from this kind of era, and I think this for me is from their second album, and this is where they really kind of discovered a formula, I think, that could work. And this is them kind of. And this is when it comes in. It's just the opening vocal.
Little by little, the night turns around. Counting the leaves which tremble at dawn. Lotuses lean on each other in yearning.
And that's Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. That says it all. You know, it's space rock. You know, and it evokes space flight, and it evokes, to me, do you know what I mean, another worldliness. You know, that they kind of encapsulated at this time.
I think sonically, there's also, it's almost like a bridge from the much older Pink Floyd stuff, to the stuff that then became, you know, the insanely massive popular albums.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's got like the slight naivety and it's like it's slightly unsure of itself. Whereas see things like Dark Side of the Moon, it's all surety.
It's tentative, isn't it?
It's hitting one note. Whereas I'm pleased you chose that. I think it's a nice example.
It's a great song. I think many people dislike Pink Floyd because all they know is Shine On You Crazy Diamond, or they know Dark Side of the Moon, which is the kind of more commercial, song-orientated side. But this many people people like Michael Gira cites this
from Swans.
Yeah, from Swans. Yeah, cites this as kind of his favourite band. This era of Pink Floyd is what he draws inspiration from. And once again, you wouldn't necessarily see that in Swans' work, especially not their early work. But that's a good starting block, I think, for people to discover that kind of era of Pink Floyd, a set of controls.
Let's move on to Echo's Arpeggio Beginning. It's really frustrating only having 30 seconds.
It really is, especially with this, because
you want to hear the next bit.
That's right. I mean, in the context of the song, that for me is where the song lifts. That's kind of like, oh, we're going somewhere now. It starts off, and this is when they really, the band themselves cite Echoes as when Pink Floyd Mark II finally found its feet. That's when they realised, okay, we know how to write songs now. And we know how to do kind of weird experimental kind of stuff. And now we can make this kind of sandwich of those two things, which is what first attracted... I've been a Pink Floyd fan since I could first listen to music. It was my parents listening to Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, and it was the weird noises on those records that really made, this is really freaky, really weird, and really drew me into that kind of world, And this is the precursor to that. This is when they realised that you can... if you were 14 and you were getting stoned, right, and someone played in the middle of Echoes to begin with, you'd be like, oh my God, that's really abrasive and horrible. But Echoes starts off with this kind of like, this ping, ping, and then builds into this kind of almost sort of lullaby, kind of folky kind of song. And then this kind of arpeggio is kind of like, it's sort of leading you into this kind of... That's right, yeah, here we go. There's something kind of menacing happening here. And then it kind of drops out into this experimental kind of wig out. And then builds. And from that wig out, it goes into this the funkiest Floyd I've ever been. That Young Gods clip I played, that's like, it's just pure funk, And then wigs out. And then they come back, so they come back into this kind of folky kind of area again, and that's the perfect marriage. That's Pink Floyd in a nutshell for me. The Echoes. That's where do you know what I mean? That's
it's the Echo. Pink Floyd, the latest stuff. One of the things that makes it work is the space in it.
Yeah,
it's not kind of getting ideas thrashed out.
Yeah.
It's having the confidence just to let things ring for a while, just to let harmonics of the instruments just do their own thing without having to be actually striking them with a plectrum and whatever all the time. And that's a good example of that.
Yeah, and there was a professor of music, I can't remember his name, and he said that is born from them being architecture students.
Oh.
He said they know what to do with a line. The song, the beginning of the song is the hallway, then you get into the grand hall, and then you're back out into, and he said that all comes, they write the kind of music you'd expect architecture students to write, and that kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, it does. I've not heard that before. Okay, so sticking with Echoes, we've got Echoes Build. Let's have some of this.
Once again, enormously frustrating. I'm sat here, ready for it to go, and this is just where they're coming out of the kind of experimental kind of wig out bit, and it's just this kind of, it's just this. It's once again, it's post rock, it's quite, it's light into, it's darkness into light, and it's kind of, and it's you're in this kind of pit of hell in the middle of, and then this kind of kind of lifts you out of that, and then you've got this beautiful kind of sort of guitar soliloquy over the top of this kind of bit of cymbal bashing, and it's just lifts you then back out so into this kind of folky ending again. You know, it's
amazing. It's with no overdubs.
No, absolutely, yeah, absolutely,
nothing at all.
No.
As far as I know, it genuinely is a live recording. It's not like Thin Lizzy going back and replacing all the instruments on their live album.
Like famously, Tony Visconti said the only thing that's live on that album is the crowd.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's an honest, and there's only 4 of them. Making that and that's even more extraordinary. You know, it's kind of to be able to make that sound just with 4 of them and the very rudimentary equipment they had. And of course, they only had 8 tracks. You know, recording live with 8 tracks. I've no idea how the drums are mic'd up. I don't want to get too technical, you know, but normally there'd be a track for the bass drum and a track for the snare, you know. So yeah, no, quite an extraordinary.
The thing is, part of the reason they wanted to record there, or the director wanted to record there, was to get the natural ambience of the amphitheatre. And yeah, I don't want to get too geeky, but with 8 tracks, you can't put a lot of microphones. Like if we want to record drums to get like the Steve Albini big drum sound, you close mic the drums. You have some mics very close to the actual kit, other mics sort of stationed throughout the room, but already you'd be too many tracks for for recording something like this. And
you forget there was no echo button in the studio. There was no effects as such, you know. So things like "Shine On You Crazy Diamond," the famous down, wow, down, down. You know, they had to get Dave's guitar amp, stick it in a gym hall, effectively, stick a mic at the end of it, you know, and he had to play in the studio, massive lead, and mic it up that way to get that kind of sound, you know. Same with John Bonham's drums, isn't it? In a stairwell. That's right, in a stairwell, you know. Extraordinary. So that just adds to the charm of this movie. Is the sound is the actual sound. And the Romans clearly thought about acoustics when they built the amphitheatre. You know, and it's extraordinary that in AD, I mean, was it destroyed AD 79? I think Vesuvius erupted. You know, so I don't know how long it had been standing up until that point, but to have that kind of those kind of ideas back then, extraordinary, really.
Let's carry on because we're on an echoes kind of thing.
We are, yeah. Once again, damn you, Sabling rights.
I want to go on to the next clip.
Yeah.
So we're running a little short on time, so I'll go on to the next clip because it emphasises what you're saying about the effects and say watch the thing. You'll see how rudimentary the equipment is. Quite a lot there, isn't there?
There is, and that sound is made, I'm told, by just wiring up Dave Gilmour's guitar pedal the wrong way around. So, but the output.
Oh, really? I have heard
things like that and the output, and then it's just the natural feedback that creates, and then he's just controlling it with his volume knob, you know. But it becomes this scream, this kind of, and that's used to great effect on the wall actually later on as well. There's a kind of few background effects, there's a few kickbacks to the kind of their earlier stuff. It's just incredibly haunting, you know, and especially, you're right, the echo that's created by that in that amphitheatre, you know, is extraordinary. And the bed of, you know, that's what they're saying. I think that people, Andrew Maben said, people didn't know how they got their sounds, you know. It was a mystery. They were this kind of these electronic marvels, you know. And that's just somebody wiring a guitar pedal up there.
Oh shit, I can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about influences. There are obvious influences that we can see in other places from this. I didn't get round to clipping it, but you sent me a video of Beastie Boys.
Yes. Oh, yes. Their song Gratitude, which is from their Check Their Head album, which, if you've not heard Check Your Head, is an extraordinary album in the Beastie Boys catalogue. And they were very famously big smokers, I guess you'd say. So I could imagine that they watched Live in Pompeii quite a few times, in their youth, despite being predominantly a hip hop act. And they decided to do this homage to Live in Pompeii, which is extraordinary, where they even went to the length, I'm told, of actually acquiring Pink Floyd's amps.
Apparently they had the actual
and if you look at
the
part of the kind of the iconic shot from Pompeii is the pan across the back of the amps, isn't it? Where you've got, it says Pink Floyd full stop London, and the Beastie Boys have kind of recreated those shots, and it's completely done with love, isn't it? It's extraordinary.
The level of detail they've gone to. There's bits on Live at Pompeii where the band are just wandering around a mountain. I mean, there's nothing else, and they stop and they all have a close look at a puddle. And I really like the Beastie Boys version. They've even got their angle right.
They have, yeah.
And they've got like the wash going across the screen, like the effect, and them looking at a puddle.
It's amazing. Absolutely
great.
Amazing.
There's something that really struck me about that, and I don't know much Beastie Boys. I got some old bullshit, the first one when I was a teenager, and I think I probably thought that's what the Beastie Boys were for a long time. But there's something about... Who's singing that one? Is it Ad Rock?
Yes, yeah.
There's something about his... I can't put my finger on it. His performance in that is so weird. Yeah. It's so intense. Yeah. His whole face is really screwed up. Yeah. And
he's got a great voice as well, an absolutely astonishing voice.
Well, the way they're all playing is...
They're a great band.
From seeing that, I'm going to go listen to Check Your Head.
Well, MCA, the guys playing bass, is apparently was the mastermind behind everything they did. By their own admission, he was the driving force, and now he's sadly no longer with us, which is it's borne out by the fact they've not done anything since he's gone.
Well, they said they wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yes, I think probably more they couldn't. If I'm being completely honest, and I think he's bass playing on that as well. He was a great musician, But yes, it's extraordinary. If you haven't seen it, check it out.
So which other references have you got?
What for?
I didn't warn you beforehand.
No.
Oh
my
you can say none.
What you mean for what this concert
just the whole aesthetic?
I think, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, they are one of the most influential bands that have ever been. I think that so many people's parents had, if your parents were into music, they were probably into Pink Floyd in the 70s, do you know what I mean? And so many musicians growing up listened to that and were drawn to the kind of weird sounds and the noises and also the brilliant songs they created. And there's a mystique around them that's never really gone away. Despite the fact they're now old and there's still this kind of mystique around them. They're very kind of private people, with the exception of Roger Waters these days, actually. But even 9 Inch Nails, A Downward Spiral, I wanted to make The Wall. That's what I wanted to do. I heard The Wall when that's what I wanted to make. And Smashing Pumpkins said the same thing. And I think there's this kind of snobbiness about them. This kind of musicians' snobbiness. When Gilmour joined, I lost interest. When Dark Side of the Moon came out, as soon as they sold a few records, I wasn't interested. And there's this kind of this thing that as soon as Syd Barrett left, somehow they were no longer this kind of creative force, and they were just this sad old prog band. You can like both of those, but I love the Syd era for what it is, for its charm, and I love the kind of more song based stuff that they did later on. I say, but this bridge area here for the Pompeii period is my favourite kind of period, really. But yeah, massively influential.
You say we've talked about Pink Floyd not being their own covers band. When I was doing the research for this episode, I did notice there is a Dave Gilmour live at Pompeii.
There is, absolutely, yeah, there is. Yeah, and the clearance he had to get to make that, obviously would have been a World Heritage site and brought all those people in and
a bit different to the 70s.
Yeah, exactly, that's right.
I think they just said they just had, in the 70s, all they had to do was pay a significantly higher entrance fee.
Yes. Well, apparently it wasn't. It became a World Heritage site after the movie. Whether the World Heritage was a thing then or not, I don't know. Probably, but yeah. So there wasn't the kind of rules around what you could do there. But even I'm surprised that he got permission amplified music inside that. I mean, there must have been.
Was there an audience for that one?
Oh yeah, there is 2,000 people.
That's even stranger.
Yeah.
I've just remembered something in Get Back.
Yeah.
I couldn't make it through the whole thing. I thought
No.
made it about halfway through the first one. Yeah,
Yes.
This is interesting.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
yeah.
watch 7 hours of it.
Yeah, I was the same. Yeah.
But in that, they're talking about the whole premise again, dear listener, is it's them preparing to make a live album, essentially. They're going to make an album, play the whole thing completely live. And there's a long discussion in that about doing it in an amphitheatre.
Oh wow, okay.
And that's a couple of years, 3 years before?
Well, Paul McCartney and John Lennon used to go to the UFO club regularly.
Oh, really?
And they were big, and the story is that, I mean, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, the first Pink Floyd album, and Sgt. Pepper's were both being recorded in Abbey Road at the same time. So the story is that Pink Floyd would go up and have a listen to what the Beatles were doing and nick a bit of that, and the Beatles would go down and have a listen to what Pink Floyd were doing and nick a bit of that. So there was a sort of cross-semination between those two records, apparently, at the time. Because, as I said, Syd Barrett was seen as the next big thing. I mean, Pete Townsend used to get the UFO clubs. I've never seen anyone play the guitar like that.
Wow.
You know, just an extraordinary guitarist. Just the way he played guitar with bottles and all sorts of stuff that, you know, people just weren't kind of doing. Well, they were doing that, but not in London, I don't think, you know.
There's loads of stories around the Beatles recording Sgt. Pepper. When they left, the next band booked in basically used their equipment because the Beatles had synths and stuff that nobody else had.
Yeah.
It's a really famous album. I can't bloody remember. Somebody who went on to be in Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Oh, I don't know.
I want to say it's not Herman's Herbert.
No.
Oh God, there's somebody listening to this somewhere screaming. It's a really famous album.
Yeah.
But they've since said, look, they couldn't have made it if the Beatles had been better at tidying up after themselves, essentially. It's like synthesizer cost like as much as a row of houses back then.
Said that with his first advance, he spent 30 grand buying a flat in London and 150 grand on a Fairlight synthesizer. He said he could have bought 5 flats in London for the price of his synthesizer, you know. And it was such a rudimentary thing. You could do about 4 things with it, you know. But you kind of had to have it.
Kate Bush was actually one of the people who really dove into the Fairlight, and there's pictures of her with the manual, which was about a foot thick. But Simon, this has been really good. I really enjoyed this.
I think if you've got preconceptions about what Pink Floyd are or what they should do, you should watch this movie. I think you really should watch this movie. It might not change your mind, but hey, watch it. It's a great piece of cinema, isn't it? I think.
Did it for me. It absolutely did. It started me off on a journey. Okay, I'm going to press the big stop button. I'm going to say goodbye. Would you like to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.